Today's lesson is on subtracting integers. Little vocabulary review for today's lesson. Since we're focusing on subtraction, I'm going to be using the phrase take away a lot, and I'm just using that in place of subtraction or in place of subtracting or subtractor, however it may be. So we're going to be talking a lot about how subtraction means to take something away. In our previous lesson, we talked about neutral pairs. So reviewing those, neutral pairs is essentially the concept that one negative and one positive together make 0. So we can call that a neutral. So if we're adding a neutral pair, we're adding a positive and a negative, and we're allowed to do this because of our property of math that says that adding 0 doesn't change a problem. So it's a way for us to get more positives or more negatives into a problem without changing the problem. And then last but not least is the concept that negative means opposite. So when we see that negative sign, we can think of that as meaning opposite. So while we might think of this number as -2, we can also think of it as the opposite of 2. And we're going to kind of review that in a little bit and talk how that's going to help us when subtracting integers. So today, as we work through these problems, I'm going to be focusing on 2 strategies that help students solve these problems. This video might get a little bit long just because I'm going to be working with 2 different strategies, but for you, you should really kind of figure out, now if you understand both strategies, that's great, but really try to, what strategy makes the most sense to you, what strategy is going to help you be the most successful, okay? So I'm going to start with kind of a basic subtraction problem. We look at this, and this is 10 minus 7, and this is a problem we've done for a long time. Right away, you know the answer is 3, and that's awesome. But I'm going to show you how we can transition from subtracting always positives to subtracting integers. Now, one thing that we've kind of always done in the past is we say that the bigger number always goes first. Well, that's going to be the first rule, and it's not really a rule, but that first kind of idea is going to go out the window with integers because that's not always going to be the case. So, we're going to take the method on the left, which is kind of the traditional takeaway method, and I'm going to show you how I can draw this out and show the taking away. Alright, so in this first method, the first number is what we're going to start with. So I always kind of like to use the representation of like, okay, so we have a plate, and this first number is positive 10, so I'm going to put 10 positives here on this plate, okay? And why I chose a plate, I'm not really sure, but sometimes I call it a game board. But essentially, we have 10 positives. That's what we have. The first number is always going to be what you have or what you start with. Now, the second number is going to be what you take away. So we have 10 minus 7, and 7's a positive, and we're taking away. So what that means is we're actually going to go onto our plate here, and we're going to take away these 7 positives. And I like to draw the arrow to show taking away, it's that movement, or you can just kind of cross them out because we took them away, they're gone. What's left on our plate? Positive 3. Which is what we already knew the answer would be. So that's kind of that traditional takeaway method. We started with something, and we're going to take it away. And the reason this has always worked with our positive numbers is because of that idea that, oh, the bigger number always goes first. All right, I'm going to show you in some future problems how that doesn't work. But first, let's go over kind of our positive-negative terms method. All right, so if you're going to take a key word out of this method, it's going to be the terms. And we talked a lot about terms actually in our algebra unit, and the definition of terms, which I should have had this on the vocabulary, I did forget this one, is terms are the parts of an expression separated by addition or subtraction. In this case, we're using subtraction. Now, the main thing to remember when thinking of terms is you're always going to take the number and the symbol in front of it. So this essentially becomes positive 10 and negative 7. Alright, so instead of subtracting 7, I've now created the term negative 7. And the thing about this positive negative terms method is it's actually going to become an addition problem now. Because since we separated into terms instead of operations, we now have the term 10 and we have the term -7. So this is actually what we learned in our last kind of lesson or topic. And let's look at, if I draw these out, so I have 10 positives, 2, 3, and then I have 7 negatives, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, this is where we make our neutral pairs and we start canceling things out. So I know 1 positive and negative, 1 positive, negative, and I'm just going to match all of these up. And I'm going to be canceling some of these out. Alright, so all of this cancels out because that all made neutral pairs. Hey, what's left over? +3. Alright, so just a little review of what I did here. Instead of looking at this as subtraction, we actually split it into terms, our first term being 10 and our second term being -7. Okay, and I do that, you take the number and the symbol in front of it, and then you use your canceling out. You use your neutral pairs. These 7 negatives are going to cancel out with 7 of the positives. Okay, let's try it again with another problem. Okay, before we do another problem, let's do a real quick kind of review of kind of these negatives and the opposites. So I've set up kind of just some pretty simplified problems here. So if we look at the first one, 3 equals, well, 3, duh, okay, and then the next it looks like, so -3 equals, okay, well, -3, what's your point here, Miss Markson? All right, well, now let's look at the next one. This next one is -3. That's kind of how we can read that, okay, and I put the second negative in the parentheses just to kind of keep that together. So actually what this means is, and this is why I did that vocab review, is instead of negative, so we can say negative, or what's the other way we can say that? We can say that as opposite, because those mean the same thing. So anytime you have that negative sign, you can really throw in the opposite term instead. So I'm going to read this instead of -3, this becomes the opposite of -3. All right, and you guys tell me, what is the opposite of -3? Oh, it's +3. Okay, so we can kind of say here that these 2 negatives are going to make a positive, okay? 2 negatives make a positive. So when you see 2 negatives kind of in a row like that, just remember that whole term is actually going to equal a +3, okay? And we're going to use that in some future problems. All right, back to solving. So I'm going to do kind of our traditional takeaway method first. All right, so if it helps you, I'm going to kind of draw my plate here. This first number is what I have. So I'm starting out, I have 3 negatives, okay? And I want to take away 5. Now, some of us look at that as kind of a +5, all right, in which, in the operation sense, it is. Here's the problem, though. Do I have 5 positives here on my plate to take away? In our last problem, we had 10 positives, we took away 7 positives, it wasn't an issue. But we're starting with 3 negatives this time. How are we going to take away 5 positives? We don't have 5 positives. Well, what you're actually going to do is you're going to add in neutral pairs until you have 5 positives. And that's why we talked about neutral pairs, that 1 positive and 1 negative make 0, because we can add a 0 to a problem without changing it. So that's what this is going to look like. I'm going to add a negative and I'm going to add a positive. That's a neutral pair. Okay, so now I have 1 positive. But how many neutral pairs am I going to have to add so I have 5 positives? Well, I'm going to add 5 neutral pairs, because if I do 5 neutral pairs, I end up with 5 positives, okay? So let me get these drawn in here, and you'll get to the point where you don't have to draw them in, but they are great for visuals. So I've now added 5 neutral pairs, and I have not changed the value of our plate because I've essentially added 0. But now I can take these 5 positives away. I don't need them anymore because I'm subtracting them off. Well, now that I've taken them away, what's left on my plate? 8 negatives. Okay, so negative 3 take away 5, or negative 3 minus 5, equals negative 8. And I got that by adding in some neutral pairs and then taking away my 5 positives. All right, let's look at this with our positive negative terms method. I'm going to start off by circling. So my first term is negative 3, and my second term is negative 5. All right, now this essentially becomes an addition problem because I'm putting my terms together. I'm taking 3 negatives and I'm going to put them with 5 negatives. Okay, so in a way, I could rewrite this as negative 3 plus negative 5. Okay, now in another way of saying that is instead of subtracting 5, I'm going to add negative 5. Okay, and if that confuses you, don't worry, you don't have to worry about that. But let's just look at our terms. All right, well, if I have 3 negatives here, and then I have 5 negatives, what do I have? Oh, that's negative 8. Just like that. Okay, so I want you to take a moment and think about what strategy are you understanding so far? Are you understanding kind of our traditional method or our positive negative terms? Let's keep practicing. In this problem, we're going to solve 2 minus negative 5, okay? So our first kind of our traditional takeaway method, let's start with 2, and that is a positive 2. So I have 2 positives kind of on my plate or on my game board, and I want to take away negative 5. Now, do I have 5 negatives on my plate? I usually do my positives in green, I apologize. No, I don't have 5 negatives. So what do I need to do? I'm going to add in my neutral pairs. So I know that I need to add in 5 neutral pairs because by doing that, I get my 5 negatives, which is what I want to take away, like this. All right, so now I have 5 neutral pairs, which now gave me 5 negatives. I'm going to take those negatives away, take them off of the plate. What am I left with? Oh, I'm left with 7 positives. So 2 minus negative 5 equals 7. Let's look at this with our positive negative terms. All right, so my first term is positive 2, and my second term, I take all those symbols, guys, is negative negative 5. And this is the one that we kind of reviewed briefly. What does negative negative 5 mean, or what does it equal? Oh, that's the opposite of negative 5, which is a positive 5, okay? So really what I have is I have 2 positives and 5 positives. Oh, hey, that's pretty simple. 2 positives, 5 positives, that equals 7. Okay, it kind of became that addition problem that is much easier for some of us to solve than the subtraction problem, okay? So very important, remember that negative, negative, 2 negatives make a positive, okay? Let's review before we do a couple more practice problems. All right, in kind of a summary of these 2 strategies we have so far before we do a couple more practice problems, this would be a great slide for you guys to take notes on, to maybe write these strategies down, or to take a screenshot so that you can kind of refer back to them as needed. So in our traditional or our takeaway method, that is where we add in neutral pairs so you can take away what you need to. So if you need to take away a positive 5 and you don't have them, you add in those 5 neutral pairs. Now you can take it away. For our positive negative terms method, we look at as terms, okay, and again, terms are the parts of an expression separated by addition or subtraction, which creates an addition problem instead of subtraction, because if we're just putting these terms together, okay, we're putting together instead of taking away. Putting together is addition. And a big thing that we always have to remember is that double negatives become positive. So if you have negative negative, that's actually going to become a positive term. All right, so for our last part of this video, I'm giving you 4 practice problems I would like you to try. Please pause your video now and solve them. Make sure you write your answers down and show your work, and then I'm going to go over them in just a moment. So pause now if you haven't already. So I am going to solve these problems using our positive and negative terms method. That way I'm not drawing out all the positives and negatives, but no matter what, we should be getting the same answer. So when I do this first problem, I see that we have a positive 4. I might just add in a little positive to help me remember that. And then I have a negative 8, because we need to take both of those negatives when we are doing our terms. And I know some of you think of this as minus negative 8, but subtraction, negative, opposite, those words all mean the same. So I know that this term is actually positive 8. So I have positive 4 and I have positive 8. Hey, that's just going to be positive 12. Okay. Now, if you did this with our kind of traditional method, you may have thought we had 4 positives. We would have had to add in 8 neutral pairs to get those negative 8 negatives. Take away positive 12. Okay, next we have negative 7 minus 4 or negative 7 negative 4. Hey, that's all negatives. And what I remember from our adding integers lesson is that when the signs are the same, so negative 7, negative 4, that's actually going to end up being negative, since they're both negative, 11. Okay, negative 7, take away 4, I'm going to be getting more negative this time, is negative 11. Next, I have negative 20 and negative 6. Negative 20 minus negative 6. Double negative again, so when I have a double negative, that's actually going to become positive 6, because the opposite of negative 6 is positive 6. So, okay, so this time I have 20 negatives and 6 positives. Okay, so because I'm using the term strategy, I can think of this as addition. So if I have 20 negatives and I add 6 positives, all right, well, I definitely have more negatives, so my answer is going to be negative. Now, how many more negatives do I have than positives? Oh, well, these 6 positives would cancel out with 6 negatives, okay, creating those kind of neutral pairs. These ones are going to cancel out. That would leave 14 negatives behind. So this answer is negative 14. And our last problem here is 6 minus 9. Now, this kind of presents itself as both being positive numbers, except, okay, our first number is smaller than the second number. So we cannot just flip these around. We can't flip them around in subtraction. We have to leave them as they are. But if I approach this using my terms method, I have positive 6 and negative 9. Well, I have more negatives than positives, so I know my answer is going to be negative. Well, how many more? Well, these 6 positives and 6 of these negatives are going to create neutral pairs and cancel out. Well, if I have 9, take away the 6 that are going to cancel out, that would leave me with 3 negatives left over. Now, I know today's lesson got long. I know that I used a lot of confusing language in here that I'm hoping you'll kind of get the hang of as you practice it more. So I'd strongly encourage you guys to go continue practicing, maybe on Khan or some of our online activities, until you're really kind of getting the hang of it. So if I go back with kind of this 2 strategies page, this is the one that I recommended. Take a screenshot of, or maybe write down kind of as you refer back. You can always come back here for more examples. Please let me know if you have questions. Have a good day, guys.